She was my teacher once. Now, divorced and smiling at me with a challenge in her eyes, she whispered, "This time, I'll grade you, on performance only." I never expected to see her again. Not outside of old yearbooks or the occasional memory that flickered through my mind. But there she was, standing just a few feet away from me, holding a book in her hands like the world around her had paused to give me this moment. Her name had once carried weight in my life, though I'd never dared to say it out loud with the kind of softness I wanted to. She was my teacher back then. Strict, composed, always carrying herself with a dignity that made her untouchable. To a younger me, she wasn't just someone at the front of a classroom, she was a figure carved out of admiration and distance. But now, she wasn't my teacher anymore. She was simply a woman. A woman who had lived, loved, and, as I would soon learn, lost. I noticed the small differences first. Her hair, once tied neatly for lessons, now fell a little looser, as though she'd given up on perfection. The faint lines at the corners of her eyes deepened when she smiled, not with the stiffness of authority but with something warmer, something almost vulnerable. "Of all places," she said when our eyes finally met. Her voice still had that calm confidence, but it carried a new note, gentler, maybe even tired. "You still recognize me?" I laughed softly, though my chest tightened. "How could I forget? You used to decide my grades." She raised an eyebrow, and for a second, I saw the spark of the woman who once commanded a classroom. But then, it faded into a softer grin. "Don't worry," she said. "I don't grade anymore." The way she said it made my heart stumble. Her words held something unspoken, a kind of freedom, or maybe loss. I tried not to stare, but every detail of her drew me in. The way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the faint perfume she wore, elegant but understated, as though she wasn't trying to impress anyone. And when her eyes lingered on me just a little too long, I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the coffee shop's warmth. It struck me then, she was older, yes, but not in a way that dimmed her beauty. If anything, it made her presence sharper, like she had grown into herself fully. Confident, graceful, but with a quiet sadness she didn't hide as well as she thought. We spoke lightly at first of books, work, how strange it felt to meet like this after years apart. But underneath every word, there was an energy neither of us wanted to name yet. The boundary between us, once so clear, suddenly felt paper-thin. When she smiled again, tilting her head, her voice lowered just slightly. "I suppose if we keep talking, I'll have to grade you again." But this time, she paused, letting her eyes hold mine with an intensity that made me forget the noise of the cafe. "It'll be on performance only." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of something dangerous, forbidden, and yet impossible to walk away from. The strange thing about meeting someone from your past is how quickly old roles try to slip back into place. With her, it was immediate. I still half expected her to cross her arms, tilt her head, and ask if I'd finished my assignments. But this time, I wasn't sitting at a desk. I wasn't just a boy with nervous hands and borrowed confidence. I was a man standing in front of her. And she wasn't just my teacher anymore. She was something else. We sat across from each other, a small cafe table between us. Steam curled from her tea as she stirred it slowly, absent-mindedly. Her fingers, long and graceful, tapped lightly against the porcelain cup, a quiet rhythm that somehow matched the pace of my heartbeat. She studied me for a moment, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "You've changed," she said finally. Back then you could barely make eye contact. Always looking out the window as though the world outside was more interesting than my lessons. I smiled, shaking my head. You noticed that? I noticed everything, she said, and for a heartbeat, the air between us thickened. Her eyes softened, losing that practiced authority I remembered, and for the first time, I felt like she was letting me see the woman behind the role. Then, with a teasing lilt in her voice, she leaned closer. Of course, you were a distraction sometimes. I had to remind myself you were just a student. The words landed heavier than she intended. My throat tightened, and before I could reply, she added quickly, as if to lighten the weight she had accidentally set down, but don't worry. This time, I'll grade you on performance only. Her smile was playful, but her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker of hesitation there, as though she was daring herself to speak words she shouldn't. I laughed softly, but my chest ached with the tension her statement stirred. That sounds unfair. You always graded hard. She tilted her head, her hair slipping gently across her shoulder. Unfair, she repeated. Life's unfair. You'll manage. It was supposed to be banter. Light-hearted. Yet every syllable carried undertones that neither of us could deny. The way she leaned across the table, her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted her cup, sent a shiver racing down my arm. The warmth of her touch lingered longer than it should have, long enough for us both to notice, and neither of us moved away immediately. I watched her then, truly watched her. The delicate curve of her jaw, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself, and the fragility that hid beneath her poised exterior. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She was human. And in that humanness, she was more captivating than ever. I still don't think I'd pass, I said quietly, a smile tugging at my lips. She met my eyes, steady and unflinching. Maybe. But sometimes effort counts more than the result. The cafe around us hummed with background noise, clinking cups, muffled chatter, but it all faded into something distant, irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the way she looked at me, like she was finally seeing me not as the boy I once was, but as the man sitting before her now. In that moment, the old roles dissolved. Teacher. Student. Past. Present. All of it blurred into something unnamed, something dangerous. And though neither of us said it out loud, we both knew, the line we were standing on was about to vanish. The next time we met, the air between us felt different. Less playful. Less guarded. It wasn't just a reunion anymore, it was the slow unraveling of two lives that had drifted far apart, only to circle back in ways neither of us could have predicted. We sat in the corner of the cafe again, the same table as before, though this time her laughter didn't come as quickly. She stirred her tea with measured movements, her gaze fixed on the steam instead of me. For a while, the silence was filled with the ordinary sounds around us, clinking silverware, soft conversations, the low hum of the espresso machine. But underneath all of it was her hesitation, like she was building up the courage to open a locked door. Finally, she spoke. You probably heard, she said, her voice quieter than usual. About me. About the divorce. I nodded gently. I heard something. But I never knew the details. And I didn't want to ask. Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Everyone asks. They always do. People love a story when it isn't theirs. She set her spoon down and leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on the window beside us. Rain streaked across the glass, and for a moment, she seemed far away, lost in memories she didn't want to recall but couldn't escape. I gave 20 years to something that fell apart overnight, she continued, her tone steady but her hands betraying her, her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin until it nearly tore. You think you know someone. You build a life around them. And then one day, you wake up and realize you're sleeping beside a stranger. The weight of her words pressed on my chest. I had never seen her like this before, not the woman who once stood at the front of the classroom, untouchable, unshakable. This was different. This was her stripped down, raw and human. I leaned closer, resting my arms on the table so my voice reached her without anyone else hearing. That must have been unbearable. Her eyes finally flicked back to mine, glistening but unshed. Unbearable, she echoed softly. But I survived. That's the cruel thing about pain, it doesn't kill you. It just teaches you how to live with scars. Something inside me ached then, not just for her loss, but for the years she had spent hiding this vulnerability behind carefully composed smiles. Without thinking, I reached across the table. My hand brushed against hers, light at first, just enough to let her pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. Her fingers stilled beneath mine, warm and trembling. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Neither did I. The cafe around us blurred into background noise. It was just her and me, two people sitting in silence, connected by a truth too big for words. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, steadier. I don't usually tell anyone these things. I smiled faintly, squeezing her hand just enough to let her know I understood. Maybe it's easier because I'm not anyone. I'm just me. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but then she let out a breath and leaned slightly closer. You're not just you, she whispered. Not anymore. And in that moment, the distance between us, in years, in roles, in expectations, seemed to shrink to nothing. After that day, it became easier, or maybe more dangerous, to find reasons to see her again. Neither of us ever named what we were doing. We didn't call them meetings or dates. Just moments. Little excuses to share time in a world that felt suddenly brighter whenever she was near. One evening, the sky broke open with rain just as we stepped outside the cafe. She laughed lightly, shaking her head as droplets speckled her hair. I instinctively opened my umbrella and moved closer. Always prepared, aren't you? She teased. Not really, I admitted, holding the umbrella above her. I just got lucky today. We walked slowly down the sidewalk, the two of us tucked into the narrow space beneath the umbrella. Her shoulder brushed mine every few steps, sending small currents through me. The scent of her perfume, faint and elegant, with a warmth I couldn't quite place, mixed with the crisp smell of rain. At one point, a car passed too close, splashing water toward us. She grabbed my arm, pulling herself tighter against me with a soft gasp. For a moment, she stayed there, her hand firm on my sleeve, her body pressed close. I wanted that instant to last forever. But then she laughed, releasing me just as quickly. Still clumsy with timing, she said, her eyes shining. I suppose some things never change. Her words were playful, but the way she lingered near me afterward told another story. On another afternoon, we found ourselves at the park. A quiet bench beneath a canopy of trees. The ground was littered with fallen leaves, and the late sun painted everything in shades of gold. She sat beside me, close enough that our knees almost touched. She had brought a book, an old classic she claimed I should have read years ago. With a smile, she began to read aloud, her voice soft and steady. Every so often, she'd pause to explain a passage, leaning closer to point at the words. Her hand brushed against mine, feather-light, each touch a question left unanswered. I didn't dare move away. Instead, I let the closeness settle into me, warm and consuming. "You're listening?" she asked suddenly, glancing sideways at me. I smiled. Every word. Her eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than they should have, then she looked back at the page with a faint smile tugging at her lips. There was no declaration between us, no bold confession. Just the quiet weight of two people who didn't need to say what they already felt. The world around us carried on, children laughing in the distance, the rustle of leaves overhead, but all I could focus on was her presence beside me, the warmth of her body close enough to touch. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the path, and she closed the book with a soft sigh. "Strange," she murmured, "how time slips away when you're not paying attention." I wanted to tell her it wasn't time that mattered. It was her. But instead, I just nodded, tucking that truth inside me, waiting for the right moment to let it out. Because I knew, these small moments weren't just passing hours. They were the threads pulling us closer, weaving something fragile and undeniable between us. It was late when we found ourselves together again. Too late for coffee, too early to call it night. The streets were quiet, lamplight spilling across the sidewalks in soft, golden pools. We walked side by side, speaking in fragments, nothing important, just words to fill the silence neither of us truly wanted to break. Eventually, we stopped beneath a street lamp. The glow wrapped around her like a gentle frame, catching the curve of her cheek, the strands of hair the wind kept tugging loose. She turned to face me, her eyes reflecting the dim light, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She held a notebook in her hands, mine, scribbled full of drafts and ideas. She'd insisted on looking at it earlier, teasing me for still writing like the distracted student she once knew. Now, she flipped through the pages, her expression shifting between amusement and something softer. "You always had too many thoughts," she murmured, glancing up at me. "Even back then. I could see it in the way you stared out the window, as if the world wasn't big enough for everything in your head." Her voice was quiet, but it sank deep into me. I didn't know how to answer. So instead, I just watched as her fingers traced over the ink on the page, slow and delicate, like the words themselves meant something to her. When she leaned closer to show me a passage I'd written, her shoulder brushed mine. Then her hand rested lightly on the edge of the notebook, and over mine. I froze. The warmth of her skin seeped into me, and the silence that followed was heavier than any conversation we'd had. I should have pulled away. I knew I should have. But I didn't. Her hand didn't move either. For a heartbeat, two, maybe more, we just stayed there, our fingers overlapping, both pretending it was casual, though we both knew it wasn't. She inhaled slowly, and I felt her breath against my cheek. So close now, closer than we had ever been. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Finally, she whispered, "This isn't right." The words trembled, but she didn't pull back. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Maybe not. But it doesn't feel wrong." Her eyes searched mine, as if she were looking for an answer she couldn't find within herself. The silence stretched again, pressing on us from every side. The world seemed to narrow to just this, her hand on mine, the faint glow of the lamp, the quiet rush of our uneven breaths. When she finally did move, it wasn't far. Just the faintest shift, her thumb brushing against the side of my hand before she slipped away. The absence of her touch left a hollowness that ached more than I expected. She closed the notebook, holding it against her chest as if it were a shield. "We're walking a line," she said softly. "And lines like these, they disappear too easily." I wanted to tell her I didn't care about lines. That I cared only about her. But the words caught in my throat, trapped by the weight of everything unspoken. So instead, I nodded slowly, my silence saying more than I dared to. And for the first time, I realized, it wasn't a question of if we would cross that line. It was only a matter of when. It happened on an evening colder than the others. The cafe had closed, the streets had emptied, and still we lingered outside as though neither of us wanted to say goodbye. The night air carried a bite, and when she wrapped her coat tighter around herself, I wished I could do more than just watch. We stood beneath the awning of a bookstore, the yellow glow from its sign spilling across her face. She looked beautiful, yes, but tired too. Like someone carrying a weight she'd never asked for. "Maybe this is a mistake," she said suddenly, her voice low but steady. The words caught me off guard. "A mistake?" She nodded, her gaze fixed on the street instead of me. "You're too young. Too full of things ahead of you." "And me? I've already lived through chapters you haven't even reached yet." "People will talk. They already do, I'm sure." Her arms folded across her chest, more in defense than warmth. It wasn't the confident teacher I remembered, nor the quietly vulnerable woman who had let me glimpse her scars. This was something else, someone bracing for judgment. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. She wasn't wrong. The world had its opinions, and none of them would be kind. But when I looked at her, the way her shoulders slumped, the way her lips pressed together as if she were holding back more than she said, I realized I couldn't let her believe I saw this as a mistake. I stepped closer, my voice steady though my heart raced. "I don't care what people say. I don't care about the years between us, or the whispers, or the rules that don't even exist anymore. I just care about you." Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes glistened under the lamplight, not quite tears, but close. She searched my face as though trying to find a lie, a weakness, some reason not to believe me. But I had none to give. Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head faintly, a quiet laugh escaping, not from amusement, but disbelief. "You don't understand what you're asking." "I can't." "I shouldn't." Her voice broke off when I reached out. My hand trembled as I brushed my fingers lightly against hers. Not forceful, not demanding, just an invitation. For a second, she flinched, almost pulling back. But then she didn't. "You shouldn't what?" I asked softly. Her breath shivered as it left her, clouding in the cold. She pressed her free hand against her lips, as though trying to hold in words that threatened to spill. And then, quieter than a whisper, she admitted, "I shouldn't want this." The world seemed to still. Cars passed, distant and muffled, but in that moment, it was only us. My heart thundered, my fingers tightening around hers just enough to keep her there. "I don't want you to be my teacher," I said, voice rough with emotion. I just want you to be, you. Her eyes closed for a heartbeat, as if the weight of those words was too much. When they opened again, there was no hiding left in them. Only fear. And longing. The line between us wasn't just blurred now. It was breaking. And both of us knew, after this night, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between us that night was unlike any silence we'd shared before. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy with uncertainty. It was alive, charged, trembling, as though the air itself held its breath, waiting for whichever of us would be brave enough to speak first. She was the one who broke it. You don't realize what you're stepping into, she whispered. My life isn't simple. It's messy, complicated. You deserve someone who doesn't come with baggage. Her words should have stung, but they didn't. I shook my head, my voice quiet but certain. I don't want simple. I want real. And that's you. Her eyes closed, her lashes trembling as if holding back tears. When she opened them again, there was no disguise, no guarded wall. Only a woman, vulnerable and strong all at once, staring at me like she had been waiting years to hear those words. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The street lamp glowed faintly above us, the world narrowed to just the distance of one heartbeat between our hands. And then, slowly, she stepped closer. Her fingers lifted to my cheek, hesitant, almost reverent, as though afraid I might vanish if she touched me too quickly. I leaned into her hand, my breath catching. The warmth of her palm against my skin told me everything her words couldn't. Maybe, she murmured, her lips curving into the faintest smile, maybe I've been grading the wrong things all along. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I simply held her gaze, letting the truth pass silently between us. And in that fragile space, the story could have ended in many ways. Option A, together and secure. She leaned in, closing the final distance. Her lips brushed mine in a kiss that wasn't desperate or hurried, but certain. Certain that the past didn't matter, that the whispers couldn't undo what we had found. When she pulled back, she whispered against my lips, "You've passed." With distinction. I laughed softly, wrapping my arms around her as she finally let herself rest against me, not as teacher and student, not as two people bound by roles, but as two souls who had chosen each other. Option B, together but uncertain. Instead of a kiss, she rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my skin. I don't know what tomorrow will look like, she admitted. But tonight, I don't want to pretend anymore. Her confession was enough. We stood there, holding each other in the glow of the streetlight, not knowing if the world would allow us to last, but unwilling to let go of what had already begun. Option C, emotional resolution without romance. She exhaled shakily, her hand slipping from my cheek to rest gently against my shoulder. Her smile was bittersweet, touched with sadness. If I were braver, maybe this could be more. But you'll remember me, won't you? That's enough. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, tender, final, before stepping back into the night. And though I let her go, I knew her presence had carved itself into me, leaving a mark that no time could erase. No matter the ending, the truth was undeniable. She had once told me she'd grade me on performance only. But in the end, the only test that mattered was love, and love, in its many forms, had already rewritten both our lives.